So good evening, everybody. Let's begin first by setting our motivation. So once again, here we are. We still have our precious human life. We haven't died since last week. And the thing that makes it quite precious for me in particular for today is that with all of the technology in our world today, the ability to transport ourselves across the world in a day, the access to the Dharma has become amazing. It has reached the corners of the world that it would not have reached even 50 years ago. And so when you think about perhaps the hundreds of thousands, if not the millions of people who have been able to get online or travel to hear teachings, and of those hundreds of thousands, if not millions of those people, how many of them have felt a connection to the Dharma, that have felt a familiarity, their heart open, an interest? I would say probably a small percentage. And so when we look at our freedoms and fortunes of having a precious human life, let's rejoice at this particular one, that we have met the Dharma. And unlike many people perhaps who have heard teachings, have just either said that was interesting, or that was weird, or I'm not sure, that we had a very positive and sincere response to the teachings. And so let's rejoice at our good karma to have that kind of interest, that we have met qualified Mahayana teachers, and that let's make a concerted effort to continue to create the causes and conditions to have the Dharma in our lives so that we can transform our minds, generate compassion and wisdom, and progress quickly along the path to enlightenment, not for our own enlightenment, but for the enlightenment of all living beings. So I am Thupten Semkhe, and Venerable Chödrön is in Asia right now sharing the Dharma, and she has requested that the Abbey community over the next few weeks go over a review of the teachings of the mind training like rays of the sun. So I find that going over teachings more than once, I come to realize that the first time around I heard a lot of things, and then the second time around, particularly if preparing for this, I typed them all up and organized them in my mind and thought about them a lot, that the teachings went in a lot deeper the second time around. So although we're not receiving teachings from Venerable for the next few weeks, this is a wonderful opportunity, not just for the Abbey community, but for those of you who are listening, to review and to get ourselves to familiarize a little bit more deeply with the teachings, and get them into our hearts in a more personal, deep way. Also, the tradition of Buddhist teachings is that we go over some of the high points of the previous teachings so that we're kind of all on the same page, and then go into the review that I was asked to cover. So I was going to begin with some of the high points that I felt when Venerable Tarpa did the teaching 2 weeks ago, that I wanted to go over very quickly, and then go over the review that I was asked to do on the beginning of the preliminary practices and on precious human life. So the first thing I wanted to just share is the beautiful quote that was the prayer of devotion for the author, Nam Kapel, of this commentary, which I find to be not only very visually inspiring, but also very heart-inspiring. Arising from the source of love and compassion, the ship of the awakening mind is well launched. Above it billow the great sails of the six perfections and the four ways of amassing disciples, which are driven by the wind of enthusiastic effort that never slackens. Perfectly it carries embodied beings across the ocean of cyclic existence, landing them on the wish-fulfilling jewel island of omniscience. So this is, for me, it's inspiring not only the tools for transforming the mind, but also the result of what is attained through transforming the mind. The one quote that Venerable Topper started this review with, which I find still not only crucial for understanding the mind training teachings that Venerable is giving, but just our Dharma practice in general, was the one that she stated that happiness or suffering rides on the tip of a thought, which is a quote that Lama Zopa shared in one of his teachings. And I think that this, for me, is a pivotal piece on Dharma practice. And it's quite contrary to the way of thinking that I think most of us have had most of our lives, if not many lives, is that our happiness and suffering depends upon others, outside of ourselves, other people, getting them to do what we want, getting them to agree with us, treat us better, and have situations go the way that we want. Believing and taking the responsibility for our own happiness and suffering changes everything. It empowers us, and as a result of even thinking in that way, is that then the Lojong teachings, which translated as habituating or familiarizing our minds, it then gives us access to actually receiving the teachings and integrating them into our lives. As long as we believe that our happiness and suffering are caused by something outside ourselves, the teachings will not go in. They won't go into our hearts. We won't be able to transform our minds. And what the Lojong teachings will then offer to us, since we've taken the responsibility that our minds are the source of our happiness and pain, then it will help us to learn to think in a way that's correct, a way that's beneficial, and a way that's realistic. The next point is that this text deals specifically with how to transform difficulties into the path to enlightenment, and also how to counteract the self-centered thought, who has been the main story writer on telling us that our happiness and suffering are caused by others outside ourselves. So this text is going to be able to help us transform the difficulties that arise in our lives, as well as the self-centered thought that is always concerned with my happiness, avoiding my suffering at all costs. And that the self-centered mind creates all of our conflicts, all of our problems, the unhappiness inside ourselves, and this particular kind of oversensitivity, where because our thinking is so externally drawn out, that we're always wondering about how I'm doing, and how we try to manipulate our lives and situations and people to make that happiness come to us and to keep that suffering at bay as much as possible. So these teachings are going to be able to give us some powerful tools on how to counteract those. The next piece that I thought was an important point was to kind of go somewhat over the history of the 7-point thought transformation. There's a number of texts that deal with the 7-point thought training, and which was first put together by Geshe Chekawa and also Gyatso Tongme Zampo. This was apparently an oral tradition that Lama Atisha perhaps began, and that his disciples then collected the teachings, and over time they were sort of collected and then written off in different versions. So although there are a lot of versions of the 7-point thought transformation, they're all very similar in points, and also have some, they're sometimes in a different order, but they basically have the same points to them. The one that we are studying right now, the Mind Training Like Rays of the Sun, is a commentary on this 7-point thought transformation. It was done by Nam Kapel, who's a disciple of Lama Tsongkhapa. The 7-point thought transformation, this is something that we're on only the second point right now with Venerable Children, but we're going to begin with the first one this evening, a review of it. The first of the 7 points is explaining the preliminaries as the basis for the practice. The second one is the actual practice, training in the awakening mind. The third one is to transform adverse circumstances into the path The fourth one is the integrated practice of a single lifetime, which is how to put the thought training teachings into practice in our lives. The measure of having trained the mind, the commitments to mind training, and the precepts of mind training. So although we're not anywhere, we haven't covered any of those, it's good to keep in mind that these run in a very sequential, practical order. This book, The Mind Trainings Like Rays of the Sun, is basically a teaching that centers upon the two bodhicittas, in particular the conventional bodhicitta, which is the aspiration for full enlightenment for all sentient beings. And the two ways to develop that conventional bodhicitta are the 7-point instruction of cause and effect, and equalizing and exchanging self and others, which this text primarily deals with. And it is the direct, strikes directly at the self-centered mind. So it's this is going to be a practical application on how to generate conventional bodhicitta. The next point was just a very short thing, and once again it was a beautiful homage by Nam Kapel to his spiritual masters. At all times I take refuge in and prostrate at the feet of the sublime and infinitely compassionate spiritual masters. Out of their immense love, may they care for me in every moment of my life. And I remember this part of the teaching that Venerable was really taken by this, because she shares a lot that for us, for Westerners in particular, we're not quite sure how to relate to our spiritual masters. We have this sort of fantasy ideas that they're going to give us a lot of compliments and a lot of strokes. They're going to make tea for us. They're going to tell us what wonderful students we are. They're going to compliment us and acknowledge us. And she says that, you know, if you want to progress along the path to enlightenment quickly, that is not what you want your spiritual teachers to be telling you. You want them to be teaching the Dharma to you in a very direct way, and that is going to be sharing their experience and what they've learned and explaining the teachings in detail. And at times these teachings are going to be very direct, and they're going to be very, very honest, and they're not going to be pussyfooting around, because out of compassion their whole life's work is to help us achieve the enlightened state as quickly as possible, and telling us how wonderful we are and serving us tea and giving us a lot of compliments has absolutely nothing to do with enlightenment, and has everything to do to our attachment to the 8 worldly concerns. The next piece that I thought was very important is that the aim of the Buddha's teachings, that in all the 84,000 collections of the Buddhist teachings, they can be condensed into 2 intentions. The first one is to put an end to all the types of mental distortions which regard the I, or the misconception of self, and thereby to acquaint ourselves with an altruistic attitude through which we take responsibility for the welfare of others. So if you were to take all the Buddha's 84,000 teachings, you would put it into the wisdom realizing emptiness, and for the wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, which is, I think, a profound and sublime statement, considering that he taught to many different people on many different levels and in many different ways. And then the other piece that I have learned to appreciate over the years as a Dharma student is that I have found sometimes when Venerable begins a new teaching on a commentary, or one of our teachers comes to the Abbey, that they spend some time sharing who gave them the teaching, and if possible they trace back the lineage of teachers who taught that commentary as far back as they remember or were taught, and then it goes all the way back to the Buddha. And in a culture and in a world where people are writing books and going on tours and holding lectures on things that they may have just learned in a few years, I find that knowing the authenticity and the purity of the lineage of which these thought transformation teachings come from has instilled a faith and a confidence in me that I didn't have in the beginning when I met the Dharma. And the lineage of these teachings began, well, Sir Lingpa, who was the one who just opened Atisha's heart to bodhicitta, Drontompa, Potawa, Sharawa, Chekawa, and then eventually to Nam Kapel. So the historical account of the lineage of these teachings, including their unique qualities, which will encourage the intelligent to appreciate them with genuine interest. So each of these teachers had very unique personalities. They taught their students in very unique ways, and this lineage went unbroken from teacher to student over hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the teachings that we're receiving from Venerable right now come from this very authentic, pure lineage. And for me, it inspires a lot of confidence that what I'm hearing has been proven. There are spiritual masters that have realized these teachings. And that gives me hope that maybe somewhere, some life, I'll also be able to actualize them. The other beautiful thing was the relationship between Atisha and Sir Lingpa, who had very different opinions about philosophical views on emptiness, but yet that never got in the way of the deep respect and love that Atisha had for Sir Lingpa. He studied with him for 12 years on the practice of bodhicitta and these thought transformation practices, and despite the difference in opinion on major issues of philosophical importance, he gained great love and respect for his teacher. And so Venerable kind of chided us in her funny sort of way, saying, you know, if your teacher disagrees about what color you're painting something, or how you're planting the garden, or how fast you're driving, you take serious affront to that. To see them as really small and inconsequential, and that if your teacher inspires you and you have faith and trust in them, that's the most important thing. What they think about how you do things or what you eat and things like that, it doesn't matter. And then the other piece that I felt very helpful too was that Drone Tompa, who began the 3 major Kadam lineages, it really helped me to understand that the Buddha's teachings fit with the dispositions of students, that they're not all taught in a particular way, so that if you tend to understand and comprehend things in a different way, that you're not going to be able to understand the teachings. So the Kadam lineage, which is the lineage that holds these thought transformation teachings, there were 3 different ones. There was the Kadam Lam Rinpa. They were the students who practiced Lam Rim, basically, and that they practiced it as if the Buddha was teaching it to them personally. So they were able to take it very deeply into their minds and integrate it into their lives. The second one, which was the scriptural Kadampas, and they were the ones that were more intellectual and studied the philosophical texts and integrated them into the path. So they came from a very different perspective. And then the third one, which was the Kadam lineage of pith instructions, where the students basically received the teachings on thought transformation directly from their teachers orally. And so they practiced what their teachers instructed. And then finally, I found that I personally find that analogies work really well for me when it comes to practicing the Dharma. And 2 lines from the 7-point thought transformation said that we should understand the significance of these instructions as like a diamond, the sun, and a medicinal tree. And so these teachings are like a diamond, in that no matter how small the piece of diamond, even the most smallest piece fragment is most precious. So even knowing a little bit about the mind training is helpful to the mind. It eliminates the sense of impoverishment, and it also gives us a richness of possibility and of potential. The second analogy is that these teachings are like the sun, which strikes very strong for me, is that it eliminates the darkness of the mind. For by knowing just one part of this teaching, you can eliminate the self-centered attitude induced by the ignorance of misconceiving the self and the darkness of the primary and secondary disturbing emotions. So sometimes when I feel really discouraged, to put the teachings more as a visual, like a bright sun coming and sort of opening the darkness of my heart as far as the obscurations. Sometimes I'm really confused about what I'm hearing, or I don't get it at all. Seeing the teachings more like sun can be a very helpful analogy. And lastly, as a medicinal plant which has the power to cure the 424 diseases, even in its small parts like the roots, the fruits, even the branches have all of this power. Similarly, there is no need to mention how if you understand the teachings on mind training, you will uproot the chronic disease of the 84,000 disturbing emotions. Because understanding but one part of this teaching will serve as the most perfect remedy for these ailments. And so, the times that we're in right now, as Shakyamuni Buddha has come towards a time which is called the 5 degenerations. And as much as we would love perfect conditions for practicing the Dharma, where there's not a lot of noise, there's peace and quiet, we have plenty of food, there's no war, no global warming in the world. If we wait for the opportunity to practice under perfect conditions, we will never practice. So mind training teachings help us to practice in whatever conditions, whatever environment we find ourselves in. And instead of seeing these challenges as obstacles, they spur us on to practice the path. So those were some of the high points that I felt very beneficial for Venerable Tarpa's review a few weeks ago. And so the review that I was asked to share tonight is the actual teaching. So we're going to start with the preliminaries. So the first of the 7 points, which is explaining the preliminaries as a basis for the practice. So first, train in the preliminaries. And at this point, Venerable said, you know, we think that, you know, if we're going to do any great Dharma practice, first we're going to need to go to the highest, most complicated, most exotic practice that has the best advertisement and costs the most money. And so what she's saying is that first train in the preliminaries, which are contemplating precious human life, impermanence and death, karma and its effects, and the disadvantages of cyclic existence. So we're not going for highest class Tantra, folks. We're going for precious human life, impermanence and death, karma and its effects, and the disadvantages of cyclic existence. And before we even begin the preliminaries, the next section of the text talks about the 6 preparatory practices to get our minds and bodies as suitable vessels so that we can then begin on the preliminaries. So there are 6 of them. The first one, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because Venerable went into detail for setting up water bowls and how to sit and things like that, but I'll just highlight them. The first one is to sweep and clean the room. It's not highest class Tantra, it's clean your room. She uses the analogy that our rooms, many times she has found, are kind of analogous to the states of our mind. So if we've got rooms that are cluttered or dirty, unorganized, she says chances are the mind may be somewhat similar to the state of the room. So she said to check it out, and if you want a little bit more clarity in your mind, do a spring cleaning on your room. Anything that you haven't used, you know, give away to charity or throw away. So underneath the preparing the room, we set up our altar. And this I won't go into a lot of detail too, but it was very important that wherever you put your altar in your room, you put it higher than your bed, and you don't put it to where, when you're sleeping, that your feet point to not only your altar, but also any Dharma materials. She recommends that all of your spiritual teachers' pictures be up at the highest place, and then the Buddha down on the altar. And then, depending on if you want your altar to be more elaborate or not, you can have water bowl offerings. You can do offerings of different types of substances. The Buddha statue represents the Buddha's holy body. A stupa on your altar will represent the Buddha's holy mind. And then a text like the Heart Sutra, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, would represent the Buddha's holy speech. So those are things that she recommends that are very helpful to have on your altar. And then the second one is to make offerings. And this practice helps us to create joy and also helps loosen up any form of miserliness or stinginess in our lives. It also helps to create a lot of merit because the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha are very powerful objects of refuge. So by making offerings to them, we create a lot of merit, which helps us along the path as far as realizing bodhicitta. So Venerable went into a very detailed explanation of how to set up the water bowls. And the thing that I find best as far as visualizing when I'm doing them is that she says to imagine that the cloth is the wisdom realizing emptiness, and that the bowls, when they're empty as you're wiping them, is your mind filled with defilements, or sentient beings' minds filled with defilements. And that the water is dissolved into emptiness, and that you visualize it as a blissful wisdom nectar that you offer to the Buddhas, which generates great bliss in their minds. Or you can actually offer the blissful wisdom nectar to sentient beings, who then generate bliss in their minds. She also recommends, and we do this here at the Abbey, not so much on our own personal altars, but on the main altar in the meditation hall, is that we do lights, which represent wisdom, incense, which represents ethical conduct, flowers representing virtue or impermanence, food, samadhi, a blissful state of concentration, and music, which also symbolizes impermanence. So these are the ones that you can actually make on your altar. And then there's also the ones that you can mentally imagine. So the things that are too large to put on your altar, like your cars, vacations, people you're attached to in your life, clothing. And then filling the sky with these offerings, just billions and billions and billions of them. And for those people who are really creative and have very creative imaginations, this is where I find I enjoy doing these. I have a very creative imagination, so when I get to this point, I try to use it in a virtuous way. And then at night, Venerable just shares to take them down is just to remember once again that you're purifying sentient beings' negative karma as you're wiping the bowls. The third of the 6 preparatory practices is to sit in a comfortable position and examine your mind. So this is the opportunity to sort of sit down and kind of touch base with yourself and see, what's the feeling in your mind. In the morning, I'm semi-asleep and I'm groggy and I'm not quite sure where I am. So it's a good opportunity to touch base. And this is the time where you can do the breathing meditation to sort of wake yourself up and get yourself focused on your cushion. Then the next thing under this is, when you sit in a comfortable position, examine your mind, you do the breathing meditation, you set a motivation. And this, boy, if you're sitting on your cushion and you don't know why you're there, you're not going to get very far. So this is for me, is a time where I can be really honest with myself. Because if I'm showing up and I'm sitting there, touch base in a place inside my mind, what is it that I want? What are my deepest aspirations? What do I want to work on? And, what are my hopes? And this is where I do that, is when I set my motivation. And I try to make it as big as possible, not just about Semke's happiness and feeling better and cultivating virtue, but also thinking much more about other living beings. And then the third in this is to get ready to meditate, which is the meditation posture. And Venerable goes into detail on the tapes on how to sit, how to hold your head, and things like that, which I won't go into. The next on this is to take refuge, and to do this with a relaxed mind, and to do it in a very personal, heartfelt way. So you can be as elaborate as you want. You can put Shakyamuni Buddha in the space in front of you, and put Manjushri on his left, Maitreya on his right, Vajradhara behind him, fill the entire sky with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and lights and all sorts of Dharma teachings, the sound of the Dharma, however elaborate you want, or you can just simply place the Buddha in the space in front of you. Something that works for you. And that's the beauty about the Dharma, is that you can make this very much your own practice. And then after you've put that together and you've made a heart connection to the refuge field, then you imagine dissolving the refuge field into the Buddha in the space in front of you. Then the fourth of the practices is to visualize the merit field, which is different than the refuge field. And in the meditation hall we have this. It's quite an elaborate visualization. It's a beautiful tree sitting on a lotus. And in the center of this merit field is Lama Tsongkhapa with Shakyamuni Buddha at his heart. And he's surrounded by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Nagarjuna's there, Sangha's there. The Dakas, the Dakinis, the Dharma protectors. This is a very elaborate field, and this is where you see the lineage of the spiritual masters and how it's gone from Shakyamuni Buddha all the way down to the present time. And also at this time, if you're doing the 6th session guru yoga practice, is to go ahead and place your teacher in there and to see that your teacher and the Buddha's natures are one and the same. And that the Buddha, as your teacher, is not a conglomeration of all of their personalities and idiosyncrasies, but all of their good qualities manifest in the form of the Buddha. The 5th of the 6 preparatory practice is the 7-limb prayer. So we begin with the prostrations, which helps to generate respect for the teachings and to create humility, open up our hearts to receive the teachings. This is one of those that, for some of us, particularly those of us who are ex-Catholics, it takes a while to feel comfortable doing prostrations, but over time you find that it really does open up the heart and bring a receptivity into the mind. The 2nd of the 7-limb prayers is you get, once again, to make offerings, fill the skies with them. The 3rd is confession, which is to get a chance to disclose any negativities without any kind of concealment, any kind of shame, without any guilt. And sometimes at this point in the 7-limb prayer, I have a conversation with the Buddha on what's going on, particularly if I'm having some struggles in my practice. This is where I really ask for help. Rejoicing, which is to be happy about your own virtues and the virtues of others. And this creates the causes to have the actual realizations along the path. And this is one of the simpler things to do for creating merit, is to be happy about others' virtue. The request for teachings, this one, Venerable, was very clear to say that we can never get complacent to think that the Dharma is always going to be available in our world or in our lives. That is not a given. And so by continually requesting them, we're creating the cause to be able to have them in our lives and to be able to receive them. The next is to request for the Buddha to remain until samsara ends. And then the dedication prayer. And then last of the preparatory practices, which I find, now that I've seen the lineage of these thought transformation teachings, I've spent a little bit of time of what it means to request prayers to these lineage teachers. And you're requesting prayers that the 3 great purposes of your own enlightenment, of others, and of both be fulfilled, that all obstacles and misconceptions be removed. So this is all the disturbing attitudes, the self-centered thought, the ignorance, all the obscurities to our mind. And then requesting that all realizations about the path come to our minds. And lastly, that all outer and inner obstacles, including sickness, be removed. And once again, you can really personalize this. Find perhaps that there are some teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa's or Atisha's or any of the great masters that you've been reading that have been inspiring you, is to ask them directly. You know, this is the part that over time I'm beginning to understand, is that unlike some of the spiritual traditions, and for me being a Catholic, is that I don't need a mediator. I don't need a liaison between me and the Buddha and me and the holy beings, is that I can actually speak to them directly and ask them for help, ask them for inspiration and blessings. And so much of the 7-limb prayer is empowering. It gives us the responsibility, it gives us the opportunity to empower our practice and to make a very direct contact with the Buddha and the holy beings. So this is all in preparation before you actually get into your meditation practice. So next we're going to be going over what happens during the meditation session. So we're still in the preliminary. And here Venerable really goes into about how our lives are involved in cyclic existence. How we work, we drive around, we go on vacations, we have tea with our friends, we cruise the internet. We never give ourselves study time. We don't give ourselves time to really contemplate the dissatisfactory nature of cyclic existence because we're way too busy being involved in cyclic existence. So our meditation sessions become the opportunities where we get to look at our lives and to see what we're doing, what's working, what's not working, where we're getting our happiness from, where the suffering is arising. And to do that, we need a mind that is serviceable, a mind that if in meditation we put it on an object, whether it be an object like the image of a Buddha, or we want to focus our minds on an analytical meditation, that we're not wandering all over the place. So meditation is an opportunity for us to get a mind that does what we want, which is to focus on a virtuous object or a virtuous topic without wandering around samsara. And that the beauty of the Lam Rim in its initial, middle, and higher levels has a psychology behind it, which with each of the 3 levels of practice you learn to cultivate a motivation. What is a motivation? What do you actually do to set a motivation? And what are the results? You know, how do you set a motivation that you can really aspire for something that's realistic, something that's vast, something that's going to keep you going along the path? And that in the Lam Rim, we have mostly analytical meditations, which is a way that you work through the different levels of practice by contemplating different topics. And then when we get to the Lam Rim topic of concentration, we use a stabilizing meditation. So for most of the analytical meditations in the Lam Rim, we contemplate questions and think about our lives. And at the end, if there's what should arise in your mind is a feeling or a conclusion that's correct. And if there's a feeling in your mind, then you put your mind on that directly in a stabilizing sort of way. When you come to the meditation on concentration, you go into just focusing your mind on a virtuous object and finding what the obstacles are to doing that. It says here that the ideal situations for actually having meditation practices is that we have 6 sessions a day. And I know when I lived away from the Abbey, if I had 2 sessions a day, I was lucky. We managed to achieve this during our winter retreat because we have a session before dawn. We have 2 sessions between breakfast and the midday meal. We have one in the afternoon, and then the second one in the afternoon we've actually turned into a study session. And then we have one in the evening. So in our winter retreats at the Abbey, we have probably the most conducive circumstances for meditation. And then during the meditation session, the senses need to be controlled. And Venerable has sometimes instructed us to just keep a 3-foot square, that's as far as your mind, as far as your senses go, to keep your eyes from wandering around up to the ceiling, looking out the window, looking what the person next door to you is doing, to moderate, subdue what you're hearing, so that the sounds of the external world, whether it's the car going up the road or the heater or somebody squirming around, is to keep the mind focused back on the cushion. Smells, taste, touch, all of the senses, to try to bring them back into your body and into your mind and keep yourself focused so you're not wandering, because there's no way to get the mind to calm down and to get it focused if you've got the senses totally engaged. And the mind, most of all, not making plans, making lists on what you're going to do once you leave the meditation session. And then the other piece that I find also we do much more here at the Abbey, and Venerable reminds us constantly, is that you have a beneficial meditation session. You don't get up and then get on with your life as if you never had this session. If you got your mind to a certain level of calmness and clarity, what you want to do is take that calmness and clarity and take it into your day. So in between the sessions, you want to keep the mind subdued, you want to keep the senses subdued, you want to keep everything about the body just subdued. And this requires a type of checking awareness or introspective alertness, where you're touching base with yourself during the course of the day, and also going back to your motivation on why you're doing what you're doing. The other part in between sessions, besides this mindfulness and introspective awareness, is to have a balanced diet. So eat a balanced diet. Here at the Abbey, we do eat vegetarian. Eat enough food that keeps you healthy, but not enough to where you're overindulging yourself and just feeding your attachments to food. Sleep is also something that that all of us need to find out what the balance of that is, to aspire to be a non-sleeping yogi, perhaps not in this life, but maybe in future lives. It's interesting that they recommend that we sleep between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning. And recently when I was at the doctor's, the nurse told me that the body does its deepest healing between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So if we're going to sleep and we want our bodies to heal, that's the best time to be asleep. And then Venerable shared some about the karmic obstacles that come in the form of sleepiness during meditation. And I think for me, I probably need to sit on a 50-foot cliff to really address this, because cold water and keeping the room cool and wearing less clothes doesn't work. Purification, I've been doing a lot of purification around this. And so from there we go into the first preliminary, which is precious human life. And the text begins with the 8 states that without leisure to practice the Dharma. And I found that 4 of them pertain to life as a human and 4 pertain to life as a non-human. And in our Bodhisattva's Confession of Ethical Downfalls, there's a paragraph here that states specifically these 8 states without leisure. And it's the one that says, being obscured by all this karma, I have created the cause for myself and other sentient beings to be reborn in the hells, as animals, as hungry ghosts, in irreligious places, amongst barbarians as long-lived gods with imperfect senses, holding wrong views and being displeased with the presence of a Buddha. Those are the 8 states without leisure to practice the Dharma, right in that verse. I'll name them quickly. The first is one of the human states without leisure, which is holding wrong views, not believing in cause and effect, that our actions don't have any type of ramifications. The second one is one of the states of non-human, being born as an animal. And Venerable really suggests that the pets that you have in your life, the animals that you see along the road, is to look into their eyes and to try to imagine what kind of mind they have and what type of thought process they're capable of. And what kind of life most of our domestic animals have. They're raised for the sole purpose of being slaughtered to feed humans. Or for the wild animals that we see in the forest that spend most of their lives wandering unceasingly, looking for shelter, looking for safety, avoiding predators. And their minds are in a constant state of hypervigilance and trepidation. So she really asked us to imagine what a life with that type of rebirth would be like. The next is hungry ghost, and she goes into detail about the type of bodies that hungry ghosts have, that the craving of the mind, the wanting, the going after, the seeking and never being able to find. The mind of incredible attachment, needing, craving, grasping, I want, and always having it outside of one's grasp. The next state without leisure is the hell beings, intense physical suffering. And this is where you can really meditate on what it would be like to have intense physical pain and try to practice the Dharma. Because so many times when we have a cold or we're tired or our legs are cramping or we're not feeling well, we find those as being totally relevant reasons for not practicing the Dharma. And she really asks us to check and say, can you imagine what it would be like to be a hell being where the physical suffering is so intense, and why they would have absolutely no capacity to practice the Dharma in that life. The next is a human, being a human without the 8 leisures, is where a Buddha has not taught the Dharma. So imagine Shakyamuni Buddha coming to our world and deciding to just go off into the woods by himself and just practice and not ever share what he learned about himself. The next one is to be born in a land of barbarians. And this is a societies which don't practice ethical conduct. She said it's not about primitive societies, where many times primitive societies have much higher standards of ethical discipline than civilizations that are considered to be highly advanced. The next is to, in the human world, to be born stupid or dumb, to be severely disabled. So here we have a human life, but there's no mental or physical capacity to be able to practice the Dharma. And the last one is to be a long-lived God, where you're so spaced out and so blissed out on these sense pleasures that you have almost no consciousness and have absolutely no interest in practicing the Dharma. So these are some of the things that, it's like when thinking about precious human life, there's ways of looking at it of what it would be like not to have it, and then there are the meditations where you really begin to contemplate on what it's like now that we have it. How can we deepen our appreciation for it? So there are the other obstacles for practicing the Dharma, like getting angry, daydreaming, the mind of attachment, and the self-pity state of mind, which keeps us always judging and looking and being jealous, and that the self-pity mind will always keep us busy in samsara, because there'll always be somebody who's wealthier, better looking, more capable, and that these become huge obstacles to practicing the Dharma. And then, so that's the 8 states without leisure, and then we have the 10 freedoms and fortunes. And these are, 5 of them are personal, and then 5 are circumstantial. The 5 personal are being born as a human being. This is something, if you believe in other realms, this is one certainly worth meditating on. Being born in a central place, Bodh Gaya is considered to be a central place in our world, a place where you have the opportunity to study the Prajnaparamita and Mahayana texts. All your sense organs and faculties are intact. So once again, to get out of the complacent way of thinking that because you have all of your senses intact, you never think about how precious that is and how rare it is, and that to practice the Dharma, you need them. Wrong views, or some texts have committing the 5 heinous actions of killing your father, your mother, and arhat, drawing the blood of a Buddha, or creating schism in the Sangha. And then this one, which I find to be very extremely, I love this one, is to have faith in the Dharma. When I get complacent about what I have here at the Abbey, which is quite remarkable, is to get into a mind and get into a meditation where I appreciate all the things that I have here. The access to teachings, a wonderful teacher who is there whenever I need guidance and have questions, that I have the karma to have faith in the teachings, and how precious and rare that this is. That there are some people who are very close to teachings and receive teaching and have absolutely no interest. So this is a very powerful meditation for me when I think about precious human life. And then the 5 circumstantial ones, which are that the appearance of the Buddha, that the Buddha, when he came to our world, he did decide to teach and share his wisdom and compassion, that the Buddha had given teachings, and that the teachings still exist in our world, and they exist in 2 ways. The first way is divided into 2. Scripturally, which is the 3 baskets, the Vinaya, the Sutra, the Abhidharma. The second of those is the Insight Dharma, which is practicing the 3 higher trainings, those advanced practitioners who have attained the 3rd and 4th Noble Truth. And then the teachings still exist according to the Sutra, where the Sangha abides, where you can receive precepts and receive ordination. And that is why Sravasti Abbey is so important in the West, because that's what we're trying to do, is to make the teachings available in the West by having a fully ordained Sangha of monks and nuns. And then also according to Tantra, where the Guhya Samaja Tantra is taught and practiced. And then the last is to have a community of monastics. This is where Venerable explained that in the West we have a tendency to call any place like a Dharma center or a community of Buddhist practitioners as the Sangha, when in fact the true interpretation of that is the Sangha are the Arya beings, the ones that have realized emptiness directly. And the other one is that that are the 4 more fully ordained monks or nuns. And it's very clear to understand that this isn't that the monks and nuns are superior than lay people, but that they have made a commitment in their lives to practice the Dharma and to share what they know with the world, and that they've given up life as a householder, they've given up work, having children, making money, having cars, going on vacations, and they've committed their lives. And that it's not easy to practice in the West, particularly if you are a member of the Sangha, because there aren't that many places for the Sangha to live in community. And then the last is to have sincere benefactors, those who support the Sangha well enough and have faith in them to support them as far as the four requisites of food, medicine, clothing, and shelter. And then Venerable just went on for the teaching us how precious human life creates the causes for liberation and enlightenment, and for our lives to be meaningful moment by moment. And if we take advantage of our precious human life, there will be no regret at the time of our death. And by squandering it, by cruising the internet, driving around, hanging out, gossiping, we will, at the time of our death, it'll be like a merchant who went to the Isle of Jewels and came back home empty-handed. And the next part that she shared were those wild analogies about the earthworm, the man without legs, the man who ate the fish, and the small boy with the buttered barley flour. And without going into them in detail, is the essence of them is how rare, precious human life is. That it may not come again, such as the man without the legs riding on the back of a wild ass. To be willing to not even waste a moment of our precious human life, which is like the man going to the market and tying off his neck so he could indulge and eat all the fish and not vomit it up. And then the small boy who, wanting more greedily, lost both the treat in his hand when the dog ate it, is to take whatever teachings we've received and practice them well, instead of wanting to have more, understand what we have been taught first. And then she goes on to say that it's so important to understand that we not only created the causes this life for precious human life, but to be very cognizant that we need to create the causes for successive precious human lives if we're going to attain enlightenment. And that not just to recognize it, but to use it. And I think that's where, for me sometimes, because I have so much Dharma in my life, and I have such a wonderful teacher, I have such easy access, is that I forget that it's something that's not a given. That this life is not a given, and I recognize that I have a precious human life, but sometimes I get very complacent and very spoiled about what I have. And I lose my understanding of how rare this opportunity is in my life. And so she shared the story about Atisha seeing the man at the stupa who went circumambulating around the path, doing prostrations. Then he did recited text, circumambulated it, and every time he met up with Atisha would say, "That's very, very nice, but why aren't you practicing the Dharma?" Till finally the man said, "Well, what are you talking about, practicing the Dharma?" And Atisha said, "It's about transforming your mind and abandoning the 8 worldly concerns." And so Venerable proceeded to go into transforming our minds from non-virtue, the disturbing attitudes of sloth, jealousy, anger, self-centered thought, into virtuous minds that are soft and caring, which want to benefit others. It's not about the external stuff. This man circumambulating the stupa, trying to do all these external things, thinking he was practicing the Dharma, when the Dharma is all about internalizing the teachings, transforming our minds, and abandoning the 8 worldly concerns, which just get us caught up on continually looking for our happiness outside of ourselves. And one of the things that also hit me again the second time around is that she said that unless you make Dharma a priority in your life, no matter abandoning the 8 worldly concerns won't work, and that they spontaneously arise and without effort, and until we reach the path of seeing, we will have to contend with them. And how will we ever get anywhere in our practice if we don't get over our obsession with the pleasures of this life? We are so stuck on sense objects. And the Buddha did a lot of teaching on the disadvantages of the sense consciousness and the sense organs, and how we're so bound and stuck and hooked on them, and how they distract us from the meaning of our lives. And so, because at the end of our life, we certainly want to not have any regrets. So spending some time looking at our attachments, seeing what really is the true cause of happiness, and what is the real alleviation of suffering. And so these thought training teachings are what are going to give us the tools to do that. So that is 3 weeks of mind training like the sun in a nutshell. My suggestion is to review whatever tonight or whatever of Venerable's teachings really sort of brought some interest, or like a connection in your heart. It's very important that the things that you find that you connect to with the Dharma is to use them. I mean, they're very precious. A lot of times when I hear the Dharma, there's so much that's told to me that I can maybe pick up 2 or 3 points that really have a strong response in my heart. And those are the ones that I go back to. I either write them down on pieces of paper, or I highlight them in my book, or star them or something. So as you review your notes and you review the teachings over the next few weeks, find the things that really strike you, and just take them right out of the teachings and think about them at least once a day. And I think that'll be helpful as far as keeping you connected to the mind training like rays of the sun, and also help you deepen your practice.